Hello and welcome to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host, Doug Bartosh. I'm here today with Robert Winiecke, who's our engineer at the city.
Yeah, we'll call it that.
Our manager of public works. But probably more importantly for this show, he's also in charge of, I guess, what we call it, flood control?
Floodplain administration.
Floodplain administration. And you know, for some people, this may seem a little out of place that we're talking about flooding at this time of year. But the reality is we get a lot of rain during the summer, and the rest of that reality is we usually get it very rapidly, as opposed to a winter rain where, you know, it may rain all day, but it's not a real heavy rain generally, where during the monsoons it's a heavy rain that comes down in maybe a half hour to an hour, and we get a lot of
big volume, short time, and a lot of runoff. You got it.
Yeah. So again, we don't know really what the forecast is. I guess they're still anticipating the monsoon season to start probably in July.
I think the second week is what the forecast is kind of showing right now. Is the trend is showing that that's more likely that the second week of July we're going to start to possibly see some chances of rain. Yeah. And of course with that comes our seasonal monsoons, and like you mentioned, large rainfall amount, small amount of time, and that just puts the water down on the impervious surface, being the streets and sidewalks, and then it has to go somewhere. And a lot of times it's the washes, and washes are the big thing. You know, people don't think that they need to maintain those because they feel it's probably somebody else's responsibility, and that's probably one of the bigger misconceptions we have. You know, not all washes are maintained by the city. If it's on private property, that's outside of our domain, that's the responsibility of the landowner to take care of. So we find out that there's a lot of issues with that come up. So people really need to be vigilant and realize that if the wash hasn't traditionally been maintained by the city, that, you know, they see, because we try to go through every year and hit the washes that we maintain, so that way we've got them cleaned up and ready for the season, so we don't have brush piling up at our culverts and everything. But if it's something that people haven't seen the city out doing, it's probably a pretty good indication that's their responsibility to take care of.
So, and I think people assume that, you know, if they look at their property, they may have a drainage easement.
Correct, yes.
And explain, because a lot of people may not even know what an easement is.
Sure, you know, sometimes there are drainage easements, and what that is basically that is a platted right for the water to convey through that area. So when the subdivision was being put together, the developer said, you know, we're going to route water through this natural area, if that's what it was, or some other form where they're rerouting it around properties. And that drainage easement has been established to go ahead and be used for drainage purposes. Sometimes they're combined with utilities and other things, so that way you've got a common area for all that to occur, so it's not running through everybody's property. In some instances, the city is responsible for taking care of those because it's been platted over to the city, but in other cases, it's homeowners association responsibility. So some of those restrictions come, and they show up on the plat. So that's kind of really the place to find out that information. But
so, and it seems like a lot of that can be found on the Yavapai County.
Yeah, the Yavapai County
GIS
GIS page is really a good place to go.
Different layers that you can go in and.
They don't actually show the parcels. Sorry, not the parcels, but the easements. You'd have to go on there, find your parcel. You can either do a search by your name, your address, or even your parcel number if you have it. And then there's a tab underneath there that has information about the parcel, which is kind of the plat and some of the other information on size of the lot and that type of thing. So typically in there, under plat, there'll be a hyperlink that'll take you to a copy of the map, which was the plat itself. In some of the older areas where it's more of a legal description that's written out, you know, word for word as to what the boundary is, you might not have that. But if it's something that was more of a master planned area, then you would have a plat that shows that information. And then on there, you would see information about the easements and everything else.
And certainly, if somebody has a question about that, and we've gotten those questions in the past, that people call up and say, "Hey, I've got this easement," or "Do I have this easement?"
Correct. Yeah, and that's something that we can assist with. You know, just give me a call, and we can go ahead and kind of help look at that information and see if there is an easement, and if whose responsibility. We can try and track down who that is. So.
And I guess the question is if you don't keep those drainage easements clean, what can happen?
Well, probably the simplest thing that can happen is, you know, debris that's trapped in there or that's grown up over time and died off. You get a large flow coming through, it'll pick that material up, convey it downstream to a culvert crossing that goes under a street. That culvert can go ahead and become clogged, and then that's going to cause the water to back up, overtop the street, and possibly even go into a neighbor's home or some other properties around there. So it has some very negative implications that can really have some, you know, pretty outreaching, you know, concerns that come up with it. You know, water in a house is never a good thing, right. And, you know, we try to avoid that. But maintenance is probably the best way to go ahead and do that.
And then, you know, so we have easements, and then we have washes.
Yes, we do.
And certainly people would think, oh, well, if I have a wash running through my property, then that's got to be the responsibility of the city or county or somebody.
Again, that's kind of that misconception again. You know, it's the general assumption that yes, it's our responsibility to take care of those, but a lot of these still fall on private property or they're actually on state land, depending on where you're at in the city. And when it makes that transition, then the responsibility falls onto a different entity. So, you know, from the standpoint of railroad wash, you know, the city has a lot of drainage easements along that, which we're responsible for maintaining, and we go ahead and do that. But some of the other areas, like on Silver Springs, which is the one that runs through 6th Street to the south of 89A, just to the east of there, there's a homeowners association for the community there. They actually are responsible for maintaining the wash through there, and then it traverses on their private property through there. And we do have some other easements that we're responsible for, but it's kind of a hit or miss the way it's been established. You know, ultimately, I think if there is an easement there and the owner isn't taking care of it, we have the right to go in there and do the cleaning, and then basically assess any, you know, expenses back to that property owner.
You know, and certainly last year we had kind of a unique event where it dropped about 4 inches of rain in a matter of about a half hour to an hour at the most.
We had a couple of events in, you know, a particular area of town where it seemed like in July we had one storm that was maybe about 2.5 inch rain in, you know, 30, 45 minute time frame. But then I think it was August that we had a very large event, which is, you know, upwards of 4 inches, maybe a little bit more than that in, you know, 15 to 30 minutes. And, you know, from a design standpoint, we designed to the 100-year flood, and it's equated to a 1% annual chance of occurrence, which is how the floodplains are established. But, you know, that volume at 4 inches greatly exceeds that volume you're designing for. So there's naturally going to be an increase. Right. And the water's got to go somewhere. And, you know, water is very unique. It goes where it wants to go, and it's got the force to make sure that happens. Yeah.
So again, even if you do everything right, as we've seen across the country.
Oh, sure, yeah.
You may have a rain event that just outperforms what your drainage and flood control can really handle.
The thought process, or not the thought process, but kind of the motto is, you know, you can always have a larger flood. We design for a 100-year, but you can always have a 500-year event. You can have a 1,000-year event. You can have a 10,000-year event. You know, there's always a chance for a larger flood, which causes more water to go somewhere. And yeah, exactly.
You know, and it probably is important to tell people that if, and there are maps that indicate this, and certainly if you're buying a home, they'll, you know, before they give you the loan, they'll certainly tell you whether or not you're in a floodplain or not.
Yeah, there's a lot of that information that, you know, you want to know. The flood insurance rate maps are what you're referring to, and those kind of identify the higher risk areas in the community where you could experience flooding of that 100-year event or possibly even higher. The maps are based on the 100-year event, so if you fall in that high risk area, it's typically referred to as an A zone, where there's no information shown. It could be an AE, where depth is flooding of 3 foot or less. And then there's some other designations that they have that don't really apply to Cottonwood proper. But basically it just gives you an idea. You're in an area where the chance for flooding is higher. You could experience water in your home. It's good for you to carry property or flood insurance. And a lot of the mortgage lenders are going to require it. You know, if you're going to carry a mortgage, it's going to be required that you have flood insurance.
And even if you're fortunate enough to own your own home and you don't have a mortgage, you know, if you're in a floodplain,
it's recommended that
you may want to look at it because you never know.
Right, exactly. There's always a chance, and there's a risk to it, you know. So you got to kind of outweigh the benefits and costs of it.
Well, let's go ahead and take our first break, and then we'll come back and talk a little more about some of the flood projects and how we all contribute to the funding that mitigates flood problems. So come back and join us.
There are people who struggle with addiction and homelessness. Sometimes it may feel like there is nothing we can do to help.
But there is. You can make a tax-deductible donation and help those in need transition away from homelessness.
When you give someone a handout, you could actually be supporting an addiction.
A better life starts with better health, especially for those living in the streets.
Support solutions, not addictions. You can make a difference. Visit cottonwoodcares.com.
This is Bruce Morrow, Transportation Manager for Cottonwood Area Transit. Remember, we cover the entire Verde Valley and Sedona. Cottonwood Area Transit has you covered wherever you want to ride in the Verde Valley, all day, every day. Take Cottonwood Area Transit through Clarkdale, Verde Village, and from 26 locations in Cottonwood. With Verde Links, it's a quick and easy trip to Sedona every day. Don't forget our connectors to Camp Verde. Visit cottonwoodaz.gov for Cottonwood Area Transit and take a seat. Let's go ride.
Welcome back to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host, Doug Bartosh, and I'm here with Robert Winiecke, who's our Floodplain Administrator.
There we go.
And, you know, again, people may say, wow, this is a weird time of year to be talking about flooding, but the reality is we get a lot of rain during the summer very rapidly, and so it's important that we look at this, because it's not just the government's responsibility to ensure that everybody's property is safe from flooding. There's a lot of personal responsibility that goes along with it as well. And one of the things we hear about is, well, what's the impact of new development on flooding, and what are we doing to mitigate the impact of, you know, putting in more hard surfaces and you know, planning for that potential additional water flowing downstream.
Well, from the design standpoint, we have requirements when a new development comes in that they have a analysis that they do on the impacts that they're doing. So they look at all the impervious surfaces they plan to add, and they see what the additional runoff is that's going to create. Then they go ahead and look at things beforehand to see what the runoff traditionally is coming off the site before anything ever gets done. So then they compare those two numbers, and based on what that is, they look at different strategies to get the number that is post-design to be less than it is even before the water, from what it is historically coming off that site. So they would go through, and if, say, you've got pre-design shows you got 100 cubic feet per second coming off, post-design shows you got 150 cubic feet per second, they have a 50 cubic foot per second increase of runoff, so they need to mitigate that by decreasing that number to 90 or so.
And
to get it below that.
What are some of the things they do to...
You would have retention ponds, or a lot of the big things that you can go ahead and see where they'll have the water routed to a pond. It'll kind of store that water, then it'll meter it out over time, so that way you're not getting this large deluge of water coming out of that one spot in one shot.
So it really is, because people talk about detention ponds, and I mean, are detention ponds, are you allowed to do detention ponds?
We have to retain it for a period of time, but we're not allowed to keep the water there permanently. The water has to be able to continue back downstream towards its original flow, but we have to, you know, mitigate how fast it gets there. So it's a 24-hour requirement per the drainage design manual that Yavapai County has established, and we will go ahead and design and actually follow that requirement.
And as I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, we're actually trying to increase the design and engineering standards related to essentially every project that's going to be built in the city is going to have to go through this kind of a...
Yeah, we're actually, like you said, we're implementing the engineering standards right now, which will basically adopt that drainage design manual that Yavapai County has put together as a design standard that people need to follow when they're coming in for development. So basically, anytime we have a new development coming in to Cottonwood, from the point that these standards are established or adopted by the council, then they will have to follow those regulations moving forward from there. We try to implement that right now beforehand, and we have good success with that, but you know, there's always some pushback, but once it's finally adopted by the council, we'll be in really good shape to be able to enforce that with no issues whatsoever.
And certainly, this is a city with a lot of development that's been around for decades and decades.
Yes.
And so there are some properties that probably didn't have to follow those requirements.
Correct, right.
And so they probably have increased flows downstream because...
Yeah, that's probably happened over time, and you know, sometimes that has happened in the past. You know, the goal is now to not have that happen, so that way you're not pushing more water onto your neighbor. You know, the goal is to make sure that you have not caused an adverse impact on your neighbor by what you're developing, and you know, I'm sure the past members in the city that have tried to enforce that as much as they're able to. But you know, this step that we're taking now will actually be able to make that more of a solid thing that we can stand on, saying this is what we've adopted and this is how we're dealing with things. So,
yeah. You know, I think the other thing that when I talk about flood control and flood management as kind of everybody's responsibility, I think people may not realize that on our property bills, if you live anywhere in Yavapai County, on our property tax bills, there's a charge or fee for the flood control district.
That is correct, yes.
And the county uses that for flood control and also provides cities and towns with grants to help do flood mitigation as well. And, and we've certainly taken advantage.
We try to as much as possible. You got it, right?
To leverage some of that money back here that we all pay into it. Because certainly we have areas that do need improvement.
Sure, definitely.
And maybe they have historically flowed a lot of water and impacted developments downstream. And so what we're trying to do with some of that now is also mitigate those impacts.
Right. Well, and you kind of mentioned, you know, we have a lot of development going on right now, and we have a lot of vacant land that actually backs to some of the washes. And some of these washes haven't been studied since the 80s when the maps were originally developed for the community. So we don't have a real good feel for what the current flood implications could be or what the risk is. So we've petitioned the county flood control district to go ahead and get some funding to look at some of these, to do some additional studies. This past year we did Del Monte Wash through Old Town, and that was, you know, one of those to try and mitigate, or not mitigate, but to minimize, or let me go back, to better understand what the limits of that floodplain were, and to try and get a better understanding of what the flood depths were so we can actually change the zone to something that is a little bit less of a high risk, and we know what it is, so that way people can see a little bit of relief potentially on their flood insurance policies.
Right.
So that was kind of the big reason to go through and do that. Well, we still have some other major washes. Silver Springs is a big one that we have that has a lot of land adjacent to it that's not developed that could benefit from that because it hasn't been updated in a long time. And we also have Railroad Wash up by the airport, basically to the area south of 89A, where that's got old floodplain information. There's no current data on it, so when we have new development going through there, there's a lot of extra analysis that needs to be done. So we're trying to get all the major washes mapped and delineated very well with good information that's modern, so we can go ahead and, you know, make it easier for people to develop those areas.
And so I know one of the projects that we've been working on for a couple of years now is kind of a citywide drainage study.
Correct, yeah.
And what is the benefit of that?
Well, basically the benefit, we have an old city drainage master plan that was put together in the early 80s, and it hasn't been updated since. So that kind of captured the flood condition or the drainage conditions for the whole community at the time. Well, we've had a lot of development that's occurred since then. So what this new study will do is it'll take the information we had in the past, look at all the new drainage improvements that have been done, and put all that together in one spot, and then they're going to go ahead and determine concentration points, which would basically be locations at wash crossings or street crossings that identify what the volume of water is going through that area. So that way, for development purposes for the future, we know if you're at the corner of, say, 8th and Fir, which I don't even think those two go together. I'm just picking something. Let's do 6th and Fir. You know, if you're at that corner and there's a wash there, you know with reasonable certainty that on the one side where the water enters that culvert, that flow is what that flow says it is. So you're not going to have to go back through and restudy everything. It's going to be right there in this one master plan.
So for somebody who's going to build something, this is going to give them kind of an idea of what flood mitigation they're
this is kind of a basis for them to go ahead and start their design. You know, they can go ahead and get a sense as my pre-design condition should pretty much conform to this. They can do their analysis and say, yeah, with reasonable certainty, I'm within 2% of this number. Right. Yes, we're in good shape. Type of deal. And then they can know, okay, I can't exceed that. I need to go lower than that. Okay. Type of deal. So yeah, this is just a tool that we'll be able to utilize community-wide. And, you know, it'll even work for us if we have to do, you know, we see that there's some flooding issues and we need to size a culvert real quick to go ahead and put a crossing in based on what's there. And, you know, maybe it's an old 18-inch and the flow today is higher than an 18-inch can support. When we have to put a 24-inch, we can go ahead and size it adequately. So it'll be a good tool for everybody.
Okay. Let's go ahead and take another break and then come back and join us, and we'll talk a little more about projects, specific projects that we're doing in the city related to floods. Come back and join us.
There are people who struggle with addiction and homelessness. Sometimes it may feel like there is nothing we can do to help.
But there is. You can make a tax-deductible donation and help those in need transition away from homelessness.
When you give someone a handout, you could actually be supporting an addiction.
A better life starts with better health, especially for those living in the streets.
Support solutions, not addictions. You can make a difference. Visit cottonwoodcares.com.
This is Bruce Morrow, Transportation Manager for Cottonwood Area Transit. Remember, we cover the entire Verde Valley and Sedona. Cottonwood Area Transit has you covered wherever you want to ride in the Verde Valley, all day, every day. Take Cottonwood Area Transit through Clarkdale, Verde Village, and from 26 locations in Cottonwood. With Verde Links, it's a quick and easy trip to Sedona every day. Don't forget our connectors to Camp Verde. Visit cottonwoodaz.gov for Cottonwood Area Transit and take a seat. Let's go ride.
You're so long, you want to be out doing something else.
Welcome back to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host, Doug Bartosh, and I'm here with Robert Winiecke, our Floodplain Administrator. Excuse me. We were talking about different flood projects that we have underway right now that we all pay for through our property tax. And you mentioned Del Monte Wash. I know that was one of the studies we looked at.
Correct.
And a lot of people may not realize this, but there is I guess you would call it a significant portion of Old Town that is in the floodplain.
Yeah, pretty much anything between Main Street and the river is all in the floodplain. So yeah, that was kind of the big reason for us to look at doing that study, is that whole area was identified being as an A zone. A zone is an area that has no flood depths identified, so it's the highest risk that you can get. So we thought, let's try to eliminate the A zone by going to, what I mentioned earlier on our previous session, to an AE zone where there's 3 foot or less of flooding, and we can also get an idea what the flows are in the wash and how deep the flooding truly is. So we had that study performed by our consultant Atkins out of Phoenix, and they went ahead and did that. The report got submitted to FEMA at the end of March, and we're in the review process right now, so we're waiting on FEMA time. And, that could be fast, it could be slow, it just depends on the backlog.
and certainly, I think what we found out to really be able to fix that, it's going to be fairly expensive to do.
Yeah, we had the consultant look at some options to go ahead and kind of mitigate flooding altogether in Old Town. What would be kind of a good way to do it? And they looked at a couple different options. One was to follow the existing wash channel of Del Monte Wash through Old Town to the river, widen that out, regrade it, make it a little bit deeper, try to go ahead and maintain all the 100-year flows inside of there. So that project came out to be roughly, I think it was $2.5 million to go ahead and do. Then they looked at some other alternatives. One was routing a pipe down Main Street from the wash there by the bridge and conveying that to the river. That, I think, was $3.5 million. I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, I don't remember off the top of my head. And then there was another option, looking either going down 5th or 6th Street with a pipe as well. And that was, of course, a little bit more expensive too. So we've looked at those options. We've tried to pick the most economical one, which is the $2.5 million channel, and I submitted an application to Department of Emergency and Military Affairs to get a consideration of a grant for that. So right now that's still in limbo. They're going through their review process of projects and seeing if they're going to be able to fund things. Of course, the ultimate funder is FEMA. So you're again on FEMA time. FEMA, I think, just released their awards from 2017, and we're halfway through 2018 now. So
could be a while.
It could be a little while. You got it.
And obviously what we found out, which was no surprise, is the historic bridge that was built by the WPA back in the 1930s is kind of a choke point.
It's kind of a bottleneck. And you got it. Yeah,
and that's one of the big problems.
Right.
And you don't want to remove the bridge because it is so beautiful and historic, and
it's got some character and charm for all.
Yeah, you got to come up with something different.
Exactly. Right? So we've looked at a couple parallel pipes that can handle some larger flows, get it through there. But then the problem is now you've got more flow going down to an area that's not developed or improved either. So we need to take care of that next piece going down. So trying to look at phasing. It seems backwards, but if you're going to phase the project, you actually have to start at the river and work your way back up to the bridge. Yeah. And that seems counterintuitive. So we're going to try and go for the whole shot if possible.
Well, and then the other major wash that we've really done a lot of work on is Railroad Wash.
Yes, it is, correct, right.
And we've still got another project coming on up on that.
There's more work to do there, right?
Has to do with Mingus Avenue when we do the other half of Mingus Avenue from essentially 8th Street down to Main Street.
Correct, right, exactly.
So.
And then we also last year, actually summer of 2016, we did a improvement project at Cottonwood Village to help take that whole facility out of the floodplain. And we need to formalize that change into FEMA as well. So we would look at getting those improvements. But we've done some improvements along there. It took a lot of the homes between Paula and Beach out of the floodplain, which was a great improvement for the whole community. So yeah, there's a lot of things that we can do, but these things take time. They take money, of course, but they do have very far outreaching impacts.
And then I guess the other probably major wash is Silver Springs.
Yeah, Silver Springs is another major one, and we have a project that we're going to be going to council later this month for acceptance of a contract for a contractor to do some maintenance work for us. We have a piece that we have a drainage easement on by Pizza Hut there, and there's been some severe erosion that's starting to impact their parking lot. So we have to go ahead and do some improvements there. So we have a contractor on. Plan to have a contractor on board once we approve the bids to go ahead and get that work done.
And I guess moving south, do we have any other major washes?
Yeah, Oak Wash by Home Depot is another one of the major washes.
Right.
That kind of snakes through there. That one goes up to kind of Camino Real kind of snakes its way over. So
down
we have
through,
that's our next big one.
Suzy Q's there. And is it
actually,
that one?
I think that isn't Oak Wash. That's kind of an offshoot of it. But Oak Wash is that really big one there when you come in off of 260 into Home Depot between the gas station and Fry's. That's Oak Wash there. Okay. So that's one of the bigger ones. And then the other washes over by Walmart are pretty much kind of taken care of at this point. But.
And I anticipate that we're really talking, and there's many smaller projects that we're looking at as well. But the reality is, this is going to take many years.
Yes, it will.
To get us into a situation where, we're pretty secure in terms of flooding and rainwater falling on us.
And I think right now our concentration is trying to go ahead and determine where those true high-risk areas are. And to be able to identify that, so that way we can have a good understanding of what projects we can do moving forward to actually mitigate those issues. And if we don't have that basis of these are the issue areas, it's kind of shooting with the blind, or you got blinders on kind of a deal.
And I think as we close out here today, I think probably a lot of people think flooding.
Yep.
We live in the desert. Why do we have flooding in the desert?
Yeah.
But the reality is, if you watch those emergency response shows, every time somebody's caught in their car in a flooded area, It's usually Arizona.
Right, that it is. So, I mean, you've got a lot of dry soil. It doesn't have a chance for the water to get in. When it gets there, it dries out. It kind of calcifies a little bit more, so you get a crust. The water's not going to penetrate into the ground. And the other thing is we get so much water so quickly that it just can't get in there. So it's going to run. Yeah. And, you know, we've got hilly terrain here, so it's even more. You got incised channels. It comes down off the mountain. It comes down fast. It all gets together, and it just runs. Yep. So wait 20 minutes, and then you can go by.
so the final caution is, and we have a couple of low...
yes, we do. Low water crossings.
Low water crossings in the city on 6th Street.
Yep, there's one on Camino Real as well. Yep.
You know, if those are running, don't go through.
Yeah, don't cross those.
It's just too dangerous. And the water is a lot more powerful than you really think it is. And it's even same with the river. You know, don't get in the river when the rain's coming down like crazy, as we saw last year with that tragedy in Payson.
Right.
You don't know what's coming down river because you don't know what's happening at the top of Mingus Mountain or the top of the Rib. So use caution anytime there's a monsoon in the area. Not only the water, but the lightning. You know, it poses a danger. So, and we want you to have a safe summer. So again, if you ever have any questions about flooding, flood mitigation, certainly call Robert, certainly call City Hall, and we'll get you in contact with the right people to answer all your questions. But thanks for joining us, and come back and join us again on Inside Cottonwood.